Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here as part of the Life Sciences Workforce Conference today. Fantastic day so far, and we're going to finish really strong with some great panelists and a great moderator who I'll introduce in a minute. I want to thank Carla and the whole MassBioEd team for just putting on a fantastic conference once again this year. It's so important. I'll give some background and my view on that in a minute. And really, I look forward to seeing everyone next year in person because I think we're safe to say we're on a good climb here. I shouldn't maybe speak too quickly, but I would say it's exciting as we enter the summer to see where we're at. So as you've heard today and over the last few years at this conference, we've had really enviable growth in the state of Massachusetts around biotechnology, and really we're leading the world in innovation and really producing life-saving therapies. And look, the best example to point out here is, of course, is Moderna and the COVID vaccine. I mean, if you go back 30 years ago and the investments that the state started to make in biotech and the incentives that were put in, that's how 30 years later, 6 months go by and we have a vaccine. It's really a remarkable story. And I think it starts with a great center of excellence for academics, and of course investment, and of course building a workforce and capabilities here. And we're serving well in excess of 1 billion patients worldwide from medicines really developed or manufactured here in the state of Massachusetts. So it's extremely exciting to be part of this important conference where we really do want to focus more on the workforce. When I think about my own company, I'm part of Thermo Fisher Scientific, and we've just recently invested doing a significant investment in Plainville, Massachusetts. I'm building out what will be the world's largest viral vector manufacturing facility. When we think about what drove us here, was a number of factors. I think there's really access to talent and capability was top of the list. Having a workforce that understands biologics, these complex manufacturing processes and technologies, having a very supportive state and an industry that's very vibrant and alive here, of course, not just in Kendall Square, but across the state. And of course, having access to innovation and technology. I think when I think about those three things, it was actually a relatively easy decision to continue to build and invest here in the state of Massachusetts for biotechnology. But, it's a challenge, though, as well, this growth. And, we have to fuel this industry with capable people. The competition is extremely high. The attrition rate at our company, and I know Rita would agree with this, it's a challenge in competing for this talent. And there is a shortage of that on the horizon. And we think about the new expansions even that we're doing, and we're going to add another 300 employees in the state in the next year or so. How are we going to hire these people? How are we going to keep them coming, into our industry, getting trained in our industry, ready for our industry? And what's the best way to do that? And how do we think about cultivating the talent early on, but also then using different mechanisms in the state to help build that? So really, I want to start with Ms. Rita Smith. Rita is Director of Human Resources at AbbVie, and they've had a significant presence here in the state since 1989. Originally starting as Abbott Labs, which had purchased a small outpost German chemical giant, BASF, 26 employees working in Cambridge, where they discovered Humira. So great history, great part of the story of biotechnology here in the state of Massachusetts. And in 2021, AbbVie now employs over 1,600 people here in the state of Massachusetts in 3 facilities, and continues to manufacture here outside in Worcester, the Worcester facility. So I'm going to turn over to Rita, and Rita, it would be great to get your perspective on the market for talent and how AbbVie's experience in finding, recruiting, retaining the best people has evolved over the decade. So I'll turn it over to you, Rita.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. First, let me say it's a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed being a panelist at last year's conference, and I'm super excited about this conversation. I guess when I think about our talent journey here at AbbVie, I think it probably is very similar to others, especially others who have maybe a healthy amount of acquisition and mergers. As you mentioned, we have a very rich history here in Worcester and in Massachusetts overall. And I think about each sort of stage of our journey, first off with BASF, and then the move to Abbott, and then the move to AbbVie. I think a lot of the thinking that we had to innovate, change as we went along. So each phase of the journey probably had some impact or influence on how our talent strategies whether it be recruiting, talent management, how we engage and retain our people, probably changed along the way as well. I think when I think about those different changes, we had to ask ourselves some really strong questions. And I think some of those questions are around what's our foundational principles? What does that look like for us? And then what does that look like for the employees we're trying to attract and retain? And I think at each stage of those journeys, it probably flexed and waned and gave us another opportunity to do the same, to try to think about what are some of those activities, whether it's the location. So when I think about, we acquired pharmaceutics out on the West Coast when we went into oncology, a lot more flexibility. We thought about some of the different maybe benefit packages and things like that we might need to do a little differently. And then even up to and including last year, we merged with Allergan, which is an aesthetics company in a very different model. And again, I think it gave us another opportunity to think about what's important at each stage. And then when I think about here in Worcester and across Massachusetts, what are some of the things that from a Massachusetts, from a Commonwealth perspective, that we want to do differently, or maybe that we want to engage with our employees and the folks that we're recruiting a little bit differently. And I think that's led us to think about partnerships and how do you look and leverage at different partnerships. So I'm not sure if some of you had the opportunity to look across opening day with the Worcester Red Sox, but we had a very nice and have a very nice AbbVie logo right there in center field. And I don't know if that's something we might have done 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But when you have an opportunity like that, you really want to exploit that and you really want to kind of double down. And so when I think about, what our history at AbbVie and some of the different things that we're looking at, it just gave us another opportunity to continue to innovate. And then just think about the past year that we've just come through. Between the pandemic and learning so many ways of working differently, I know that was a big part of the conversation in the session before us. There's still probably some unanswered questions in terms of how the industry may deal with remote working, whether it's fully remote, hybrid, folks on site, folks off site. I think there's a lot of different opinions on what that's going to look like in the future out years, but there certainly is an opportunity to learn from all the past 12, 18 months. And what does that mean? And I think that's another area for us to explore when we think about attraction, when we think about retention, when we think about how do we engage with our employees going forward. So I think for me, the bottom line is it's really about your culture. It's about that employee value proposition, how you're engaging with the folks even before they become hired. What are some of the things that you might do to maybe market differently? What are some partnerships you might explore in a different way? And what does that search look like going forward? Literally, we have a competitor building across the street from us here and our Research Drive location in Worcester. And I'm sure that's going to continue to influence how we think about our attraction and recruiting strategy. If I think about it a little bit further, I know we'll talk a bit more about this, but there's a strong manufacturing presence here in Central Mass. And we've been able to do that without a lot of competition. And literally, with that facility going in next door, it's going to be a single-use bioreactor, which has been our bread and butter. And so I'm sure other organizations are going through the same kind of thinking. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So what I'd like to do now is to talk a little bit more about the kind of growth that we can expect. And we've got two folks here who can help provide some really great insights on the expansion plans in the industry. So we've got Bob Coughlin, who's the Managing Director of JLL's Life Science Division and a long-time President and CEO of MassBio. And then we also have Ben Bradford, our Vice President for Business Development at MassBio. So Bob and Ben, just a couple questions to get us started. As we think about Massachusetts and the fact that we've got so many great universities and medical institutions, really they're elite. It's kind of obvious why there would be employers who would look to Massachusetts to be a growth for their small startups or biotech companies to launch ideas. What are some of the things that you think of when you think about the reasons why some of these companies would come and choose to build here? Whether it might be around what are they building? Are they building R&D labs? Is it more manufacturing? Where are they building? What do they look for? What are some of their concerns? Let's start with you, Bob.
Well, thanks, Rita. I mean, and you explained a lot of what we're going to talk about today as to why AbbVie chose where you are and that miracle that's happened in central Massachusetts that continues to grow. And I also want to thank the MassBioEd Foundation and Sunny and the team for putting this on today, because the only way we're going to continue to grow and succeed in Massachusetts, if we need to focus on our natural resource, right? We need to play our strength, and that's talent. It's people. So when you ask the question about why there's so many companies coming to Massachusetts and why have we grown significantly over the last 2 decades, and how have we been able to recruit, 19 of the top 20 pharma companies to have a physical presence here? It's because of people. It's because of the talent. It's because of that large amount of colleges and universities that you talked about. We recruit people from all over the world to educate them. We hope we can keep them so they'll work here. You look at the fact that academia, industry, and government starts working together with things like the Massachusetts Life Science Initiative, and we have a Massachusetts Life Science Center. Very important to have that one point of contact. And it all comes back to, and we'll talk a lot more about this, and I'm excited to be here with my friend and former colleague from MassBio, Ben Bradford, because we geek out on economic development. And the fact is, the reason we continue to be able to grow and focus on economic development and this sprawl across the Commonwealth, and we'll talk more about it, is because of the people. So it's all going to come back to the people and the pipeline. And this is something that we talk a lot about. And it really comes back to that whole live, work, play. You brought up the Worcester Red Sox, the Woo Sox. Who ever would have thought that building a baseball stadium and having minor league baseball would be such an important component of economic development for a region of the Commonwealth? But it is. It is. And we know that. And we're going to continue to plan. This stuff doesn't happen by accident. And, we'll have some slides for the folks in the audience to talk about where this pipeline's going of new expansion from 2021 to 2024. And we'll talk about that. But I'd love to hear more from my colleague, Ben, as well, as to why he thinks Massachusetts is so attractive to these companies.
Yeah, I think Bob and Rita, you both hit the nail on the head. It starts with the people, but it also starts with the investment in the industry, and that's at the earliest stage. That's NIH funding, and that's something MassBio has worked on long and hard to ensure that that money continues to come into Massachusetts, because that's where that early stage research is coming from. That's where those early stage companies are coming from. Those are companies that are then going to incubators all throughout Massachusetts. But those early stage companies are why those larger companies are coming as well. It's why the CDMOs are coming to Massachusetts, as we see more and more of our companies start to manufacture with service providers. They're going to locate outside of Boston and Cambridge, outside of 128. So it starts with that early stage investment. It starts with investment in education, making sure that we have the talent here, because that's why the companies are coming here. That's why that early stage investment is here. And that's why that follow-on investment from larger companies is here.
Excellent. Well, maybe it's time for us to take a look at some numbers. I think, Ben, you've got some information that you're going to share with us when we think about some of the places that people are going from a real estate perspective, as well as from an overall employee perspective.
So I think Bob's got the slides for those.
Oh, sorry.
As it relates for the real estate.
Well, yeah, and we can tag team on this, Ben, and talk about the expansion across the Commonwealth. When we look at, I want to thank Mark Russo, my colleague from JLL, who prepared these numbers and statistics for us. He also is a graduate, former team member of the MassBioEd Foundation, as well in the economic development team, in the MassBio family. But when you look at what's happening, folks, you look at these red dots. And the bigger the dot, the bigger the development. Most of it's research in R&D labs, okay, lab space. The red dots are lab space. The blue dots are what we call GMP, manufacturing opportunities. One of the things that's an amazing phenomenon here in Massachusetts is that we've grown in research, development, and manufacturing. Okay, it goes all the way back to winning the Bristol-Myers Squibb, and even BASF back in the day, Rita, before the whole Abbott, AbbVie. The same thing goes with Bristol-Myers Squibb up in Devons, and then Shire came to Lexington. Organogenesis was down in Canton, Mass. We started really seeing this phenomenon of biomanufacturing. And now as the industry evolves towards cell and gene therapy, there's going to be a lot more. Chris Murphy, who kicked us off here this afternoon, was Brammer. Now it's Thermo Fisher Scientific, real leaders in the cell viral vector manufacturing space. So important. So when you see the blue dots, those are GMP, those tend to be further out. You look at the heavy concentration of the red dots of proposed life science development pipeline in the future, okay? So this is from 2021 to 2024. If you look at the sprawl across the Commonwealth, it's even up, it needs to be updated more because there will be red dots in Worcester. And I feel bad, we should show the entire state. And we will in the future when we have more time, but there's going to be red dots out around UMass Amherst, the Pioneer Valley, as well as out in the Berkshires. This is happening across the Commonwealth. But if we go to, when you look at the numbers, the total amount of space currently occupied by life sciences in Massachusetts, it's about 46 million square feet, most of it R&D space. Let's go to the next slide so you can see the urban insert, and you'll see how it's not just Kendall Square and the Seaport anymore. There's a lot of red dots and there's a lot going on there, but as you can see, there's more growth out in West Cambridge, up to Somerville, Malden, heading out west all the way through Watertown. We know what's happening in Waltham. So as you can see, folks, these R&D clusters are expanding further out. And you know, we'll go to the next slide because I think it's important that we look at the numbers. Like what's driving this growth? Before we even talk about what's in the pipeline, I just want to tell you that, hey, I've been in this industry in one shape or another for 19 years since my son with cystic fibrosis was born, and I was at MassBio for close to 14 years. But even when I was in government prior to MassBio, these are things that we worked on because of, you know, my passion for the industry, and hopefully there would be a company that would invest in therapy that would work for my son, which has happened. So and I'm sorry that I get so excited over it, but this is what this industry does, and it's the tip of the spear right here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So when you look at the fact that the demand has never been higher. This is, you know, close to 9 million square feet of demand for lab space right now in the Commonwealth. And we all know that there's not a lot of space available. So that's why we're trying to play catch up here. So when you look at the fact that we have 46 million square feet of folks, predominantly R&D space, but let's look at the production. We're steering down planned production of new space up to close to 20 million square feet, 19.5 million square feet. That's coming online over the next 3 years. That's a 40% increase over our current capacity. Out of all of that, 10 million square feet of these planned build-outs are already underway. All right, so if those proposed ones don't happen, what's the minimum? The minimum is that we're still going to have 22% increase over our current capacity with the addition of 10 million square feet. So why do we talk about that? Well, why is it happening? It's happening because as money comes in, we've had a record amount of IPOs, record amount of venture capital dollars, record amount of new science, as Ben was alluding to early, record amount of NIH funding, and it's really been an extraordinary couple of years. And there's all different slides that we can share with you on that. But the fact of the matter is that those investments have driven growth. As we grow, what good are these labs? What good are these GMP facilities if we don't have the human resource to put inside of it? Okay, so just using rough estimates of, let's say that each employee, for every 500 square foot of expansion, that represents one life science employee. That translates into somewhere between, at a minimum, you know, with the 10 million that's already underway, that's 20,000 new employees. And the proposed full pipeline through 2024 would be 40,000. So we're somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 new jobs in the industry between now and 2024. That's what these companies will be needing. So the question is, and what we're going to talk about is, how are we going to find and train these people, right? We got to continue to work on it. And again, I'm sorry I get all excited, but these numbers are amazing.
No, Bob, love the enthusiasm. You're absolutely right. I think about what we learned at the beginning too, with the number of employees that we can experience with the number of growth that we have between 2020. I think it was over 100,000, 109,000, right? So when you couple that within the real estate space, where do we go?
Yeah, I don't know. Is there another slide there, guys? I think that was it, right?
Oh, last one.
I went over it. I talked to this already. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself, but this shows you what the high range and low range is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so maybe with that said, Ben, maybe you could think about for us a little bit around, so what do we do to prepare for all of this real estate and infrastructure? There's an employee piece that Bob talked about, but I think there's also a broader piece across the Commonwealth as well. What are your insights when you think about those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's something, not to be pessimistic, but Massachusetts feels the crunch already. A lot of our members are always asking and looking for ways to find new talent already. So it's something we're working on, as we speak. Bob always talks about the partnership between academia, industry, and government, and I think that now, even more than ever before, that's especially important as we look to find ways to connect industry and academia and make sure that the talent coming out of academia is ready to start working directly in our companies. We need to create those partnerships. We need to get industry into academia to make sure that they're coaching up the students on whatever they need right away. I think that's step one, and that's something that that's actionable soon. The second thing is using the full resources of what Massachusetts has to offer, right? You look at the demographics of our industry, and historically, it has been heavily weighted towards Caucasian people. There's no question about it. So and that's not Massachusetts. That's not all of Massachusetts. So what did MassBio do? We hired a director of diversity and inclusion. We've been working with our members to educate them on creating diverse hiring plans. We've been creating Project On-Ramp with Life Sciences Cares and the Mass Life Sciences Center in order to pull on the entirety of the resources that Massachusetts has, right? If we just make sure that the total population of Massachusetts has the understanding of what it takes to work in this industry, this is a problem that can resolve itself pretty quickly. And as we look at manufacturing, some of these jobs don't take quite as long to get taught up on what it takes to work there. So, it's great to see that we have potentially 40,000 new jobs in this industry for Massachusetts. I grew up in the western part of the state, and all we ever heard growing up was, all the investment goes to the eastern part of the state. Nothing goes to the west. But now this is really an industry with manufacturing coming here that can support the entirety of Massachusetts, whether it's regionally, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's racially. So I think that as long as we keep doing what we're doing and then piggyback on top of it and make sure that everyone understands what it takes to work in this industry, I think we're in a really good place.
Bob, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, because I couldn't agree with Ben more. He's completely 100% correct. And to add to it, like right now, it's so important. I'm working with companies, global companies all over that are doing, international, national searches for their location. We are in a very precarious situation in this industry, in that if we don't continue to add to the infrastructure and add to the human resource component of what we do, we're at risk of losing many opportunities to other emerging clusters, emerging markets. And again, there's nothing we can do to change the competition. That's okay. But what we need to do is focus on what we need to do here. And that's why the mission of MassBio and the mission of MassBioEd are more important now than ever. And we need to ensure that government and academia do their part, right? Industry needs to make sure that we're aligned. We need the HR groups for all of our member companies need to think ahead and prepare academia to make sure we have the output to fill these jobs. And I'm not just talking about recruiting people from other parts of the world to come here and retain them. That's one part of it. But what about our own pipeline of neighbors and friends that live in our own communities here in Massachusetts? How do we open their eyes to biotechnology? How do we make sure that we focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion so that we can get, like Project On-Ramp's a perfect example, right? Everything that MassBioEd is working on as it relates to internships and apprenticeships. This is so important because we need to create our own future pipeline. And even after post-COVID, this is even more to worry, because we're seeing a lot of trends right now where there's a high turnover rate in our industry. And a lot of it is a direct result of COVID. People have had a really, really, really tough time. We need to be empathetic to what people have been through. A lot of people, excuse me, people who work in research and development and manufacturing, they had to go to work every day. And there's some resentment that's been built up because a lot of people can work from home, but a lot of people can't. So if we don't continue to focus on it, I'm working with a lot of our partners who develop these new campuses. How do you make it a magnet, not a mandate? Because we can't, it's tough to tell people that they have to come back to work. You want to make it so that they want to be there. And there's a lot, and diversity is a big piece of that, right? Live, work, play, culture, baseball, arts, right? Things like that we need to think about. So it's a whole new world, and that's another thing that makes this industry exciting as the science evolves so rapidly. And again, we're only in the second inning of a 9-inning game of science right now. We're going from the golden age to platinum age of science. We need to keep up with it, with our workforce and with our infrastructure. And that's why I get excited for my new job. That's what I do at my new company. And it allows me to stay in an industry that has been so good to my family and I care so much about.
I love the mashup of metaphors, Bob. That was excellent. Second inning.
I'm having a very big metaphorical day. I am. It's a metaphorical day.
I'm going to completely borrow that. I'm going to take a few questions. We're starting to get a flood of questions from the audience. So I'm just going to take us back just a quick step. So we talked a little bit about the numbers of new employees, anywhere between 20,000 and 40,000 needed in the next few years. One question was, is there any opportunity for you to break that down by the type of employee? I know at the beginning of our conference, Carla talked a little bit about the scientists, the operators, the manufacturing, the program managers, et cetera. Do either of you have a sense for what does that breakdown of those new employees look like over the next 3 to 4 years?
Bob, or whoever has the slides, can we go back one? Because I think we can do a little math and probably figure it out, right?
Yeah, it's the percentage of GMP of overall R&D. That's information we don't have right in front of us, but we could have the folks work on it. But if you look at it, GMP is 2.7 of 26. So, I mean, it's probably 80% R&D workers, 20% biomanufacturing. And when you look at the growth that we're experiencing in biomanufacturing, that's why programs like WPI has a program on training folks on how to use reactors. Quincy College has a program that they partner with Shire now to cater to work on that. Massachusetts Maritime Academy, my alma mater, which I'm very proud of, is creating a biomanufacturing concentration for the facilities engineering majors so that we can create this new pipeline. My fear is that we're not doing enough of it. And that's why these conferences are so important. And it's important that we continue to shine the spotlight on that because, again, GMP is going to be a fast growing sector of our industry because another thing that we learned during COVID was that our global supply chain was broken. Okay, there are things that typically would have been manufactured abroad in the past where companies are building North American redundancy in the event that there's another pandemic. We didn't think this would happen, folks. It happened, and we need to learn from it. So you're going to continue to see manufacturing sprawl. And again, it's not just here in Massachusetts and California, it's across the United States of America, which in my opinion, I'm a Massachusetts guy, we're working on Massachusetts issues, but it's a good thing for our country to see this growth across the country.
And Bob, go ahead, Ben.
And piggybacking off what Bob said, he mentioned the schools that are doing the training programs. It's also non-degree programs that are really important. It's creating customizable programs for an employer who wants to utilize a Massachusetts workforce development grant and come in and train their current staff or their new staff on technologies that they're going to need internally. UMass Lowell has a program where you can go use their facilities. They'll create a program for you, and MassBio members get a discount doing it. So if you're looking to create specific technologies that your team knows how to use, you don't need to have them go get a degree. You can just develop those plans and go implement them at a number of different institutions across the Commonwealth.
And maybe just to reinforce and add, Ben, I know between MassBioEd and some of the other places, that there's opportunities too for people to go to get a 2-year degree, apprenticeship programs, or we're doing a partnership with Earn and Learn here at AbbVie with Middlesex Community College, where the students can come and work part-time And there's a couple other employers that are participating in that particular program as well. So we've just sort of outlined maybe 3 or 4 different types of ways to start to grow and groom some workforce for these jobs that are coming open. So another question maybe from the audience, what about recruiting? How can we do different types of recruiting? And what are some of the ideas, Ben and Bob, that you have in terms of helping industry understand or find new ways, out of the box ways, strategies to look at recruiting efforts?
One I think is something we talk about at MassBio is, regionalization. This is not just a Massachusetts thing. Anything that's positive that comes out of the industry in Massachusetts is helping people across the country and across the world. So let's also use the Northeast is a smart region of the country. Massachusetts, has, a lot of degrees, but it's not just Massachusetts. Let's pull on people from Connecticut. Let's pull on people from New Hampshire. Let's not just focus on what's right around Boston and Cambridge. Let's expand this. Let's have it be an industry that supports the economies of our neighboring states as well. I think that's a step in the right direction.
Do you think that was the question about recruiting people or recruiting companies, Rita? I mean, there's 2 different
I read
ways.
it as recruiting people.
Yeah, I think we need to focus on who's here. And that's why I love Project On-Ramp. And that's why I love creating opportunity for folks who live in underserved communities right here. Okay? Because you don't have to convince those people to move. Because when we've seen that a lot of these companies that we've recruited from other parts of the United States of America and other countries, they try to get their employees to move here. There's a high cost of living. We don't have adequate workforce housing. Up until COVID, we had bad public transportation, and you're going to start seeing that come back again, right? So when you look at public transportation, workforce housing, these are issues that in the past, our industry never really stood up and took a stand on until a few years ago when we did our State of Possible report, right? So it's like, those are big issues. So when you look at recruiting, you gotta really take care of some of the issues that we have here. And that's why I like recruiting home. When you are recruiting from abroad, we've working with our ED&I group and strategy, we're forming partnerships with HBCUs, right? Things like that. How do we convince people that and let them know that we're open for business and we're welcoming here in Massachusetts, and it is a great live, work, play, and we are committed to ED&I. These are important things as you not only open your arms to these folks, but in some cases change the image of what Massachusetts is all about.
Well, and let's use the tools that we already have here in Massachusetts too. Look at the Life Sciences Center and their internship program. It's available to undergrads and graduate students, and the state will reimburse for up to $17 an hour for you to hire an intern if you have a small company. What's the best way of keeping our talent here is let's get them working while they're in school. So they don't want to leave. They feel comfortable here. They know they can make a living wage. They can stay here where they went to school, and they've got a job lined up after school. Let's use those tools and keep the people that we've got going to school here in Massachusetts too.
Ben, that's perfect. And what a lot of people in the audience may not know, that the Massachusetts Life Science Center has the largest publicly funded internship program in the United States of America. Tell me that isn't something to be proud of. Right? That's an amazing program that Sue Wyndham Bannister, Travis McCready, and now Ken Turner, they should all be extremely proud of that. It's a great program.
That's excellent. I didn't know that myself. So maybe continuing with this theme of how do we continue to utilize what we have, and how do we continue to make Massachusetts an employer of choice? One of the things that has come through the questions as well is this idea of, again, learning from what we've learned from the pandemic, and this idea of maybe being more flexible. I know that was part of the conversation before our session. So maybe if I try to link all of these concepts and ideas, is there a way, or what do you guys think about this idea of continuing to be flexible, and maybe even hiring more remotely, so that there are actually people who are thinking about not necessarily needing to move. And that's another way of keeping high energized employees Diversity becomes a player in that as well. When you think about the underrepresented populations who maybe can't move or maybe need to do work more remotely, and women who might be caregivers or what have you. And there's a lot of conversation around how flexibility has enhanced females and their ability to do other things and work in other places that maybe they were prohibited for with brick and mortar all the time. So what are your thoughts around, how we might do that a little differently and how we incorporate some of those learnings with some of the other programs that you guys have already mentioned?
Do you want me to
Wanna
do
go
that,
for it?
Ben? You want me to go first? I feel like I'm talking too much, but
I'll go. I'll go.
All right.
No, I think what the tough part about
Story
this
of my life.
industry is the fact that we do have such a high percentage of the workers that are in the lab. And Bob touched on this earlier, that there is a level of resentment. So we have to be somewhat careful. But I think traffic's coming back. There's no question about it. People are starting to get on the T more. Who knows what'll happen there? So having some sort of hybrid, maybe it's 3 days a week in the office or lab. You do your lab notebook, working from home on a Thursday, and you're back on a Friday when traffic's light. I think that's part of it. I think that, continuing to invest in the education and teaching your team how to work collaboratively while not in the same place is going to be really important, because some people like being in the office. Some people like being in the lab. But big picture is we've learned how to be successful doing things virtually. Imagine what this conference would have been if we tried to do it 2 years ago. But it's seamless now. We're able to do this. MassBio's run partnering meetings with people across the world, something we wouldn't have been able to do over the last handful of years. So I think we've learned a lot. We have to be careful about pushing it too far because you don't want to alienate the folks that do have to be in. But there's no question about it. We're never going back to exactly how things were before.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ben. And we've surveyed many of our customers to see, so that our folks, our project development group and research group can work with clients to come up with, the future workplace strategy. And we're finding that pretty much everybody agrees there will be a hybrid approach, right? Which is good because we were talking about having work from home days because of traffic. We needed to mitigate traffic issues prior to COVID. COVID forced us to up the game as it relates to technology so that you can work remotely. However, let's not lose sight of the fact that we work in an industry where you cannot do lab work from your home or from your living room or from your garage, right? You cannot manufacture products remotely. So there is going to be, and Ben talked about it, right? We're going to have to make sure that, and this is going to make human resources more important than ever. I'm trying to give the group a plug, Rita, right?
Thank you.
More than ever, because again, we've talked about it. The people that have to come to work, you want it to feel like a magnet, not a mandate. When you mandate, it creates resentment. And we've seen a lot of turnover during a pandemic. That blows my mind. That people have been jumping from company to company because they feel that the culture, they check off company culture was an issue. When how could anyone have a good company culture? It's very hard during the pandemic. We all know how difficult it's been. So the moving out of this, we're going to really have to take a look at how the people that have to come to work feel, and how do we manage the productivity and effectiveness of people remote, because it will be a hybrid.
Yeah, if I could echo both of your comments on that, I may be one of the few facilities that have both a R&D and a manufacturing all under one roof at 100 Research Drive. And so I can say that I've witnessed and we've wrestled to ground some of those questions very acutely in terms of how do you manage a workforce like that. And I think you're spot on with, it comes back to culture in this idea and sense of belonging. If I feel like I belong at a particular culture, I feel like I belong at a particular company, I'm more likely to stay, I'm more likely to give that discretionary effort, I'm more likely to do all that it takes to be competitive and to be successful, right? And make my company successful. And maybe just speaking about success, I know we were talking a little bit about this idea of working remotely or maybe a hybrid and really finding ways to make sure that whatever you decide to do, or if you can do a little bit of both, that you're thinking about culture. One question did come up, particularly when we think about folks who are ably challenged and being able to come into the office or maybe not being able to come into the office. And more specifically, with both of your backgrounds in MassBioEd and MassBio, are there any programs that you guys know about, particularly for folks who may be ability challenged and are looking for biotech roles, or maybe even commuting roles, whichever the case may be? I know one of you mentioned the T, and I know I've not taken it yet myself in the past couple of years, but I do know that sometimes there are challenges with that. So any specific programs or ideas that you guys know about around that, traveling back and forth, and maybe people with abilities, and how that might, any resources you might be aware of?
I'm not aware of any, Ben, but I mean, Rita, what a great topic, right? It is something we should be focused on. And before Ben, I don't know if MassBio is aware of anything, but one of the things that I wanted to add, Rita, when you were talking about equity, diversity, inclusion, you used the word belonging. We're seeing companies now changing it to equity, diversity, and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
They're changing it. The inclusion, it's more than that. It's belonging, because people have had this feeling of disconnect over COVID. But Ben, have you heard of any programs for?
No, but with our ED&I connections with members, that inaccessibility for certain individuals is a component of that discussion. Making sure that people with all abilities are able to get into the office or lab is a major component. Making sure that at any of MassBio's events or conferences, there are wheelchair ramps, or anything that people hard of hearing might have. We're making sure that that's something that MassBio is providing, and we're making sure to pass that through to our members. And that doesn't just include our life sciences members, that includes our developer members, making sure that facilities are completely accessible for anyone that needs to work there.
Yeah, and I guess what I was thinking about too is this idea of flexibility, right? So if folks are able to work remotely, maybe they have their equipment that they need in their homes,
Sure.
and they can still participate in the workforce and not be, an outlier, because so many more people are working either hybrid or remotely. Mm-hmm. So I think there's something in that combination of hybrid remote working that would play well with folks who may be ably challenged. So I know we are the last session before we close out today, and so I'm getting a little bit of a time check from our producer. So I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. So one question that did come up, and I think Bob, you might have mentioned about the idea of attrition and retaining people, and experiencing high attrition over these past 18 months or so. Does anyone have a feel for what attrition in the life sciences has been here lately? Across Massachusetts. I don't know, Ben, if you have visibility to some of those numbers.
So we don't have those exact numbers, but it's questions we've been getting from our membership. So it's conversations that we need to be having more broadly. And that's something that we can do, is aggregate our membership and figure out what everyone is feeling. So maybe it's getting a group of HR professionals together and figuring out, what's AbbVie dealing with, what's company XYZ on the South Shore dealing with, what's the turnover rate, and how do we stop it, and what's driving it? Because we don't have the exact data now, but it's data that we need to have, because it's something that, in an ideal world, we're not having that happen, because how much money goes into training someone new, how much money goes into finding someone new, and that's not a good use of our money, when we want the money to be going into manufacturing, going into R&D, going into building new spaces. We don't need it to be going into a cyclical version of training folks and finding folks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I won't share necessarily my direct numbers for AbbVie, but just in our conversations in HR circles, for sure, I think that we've experienced as an industry a little higher than a normal attrition. And I think that's in part because of the way the pandemic has allowed candidates to be able to be recruited. Back before the pandemic, a lot of times what candidates would do is, of course, take some time off if you had to travel, even if it was, from Central Mass to Boston area or vice versa. You probably took at least a half day so you could travel, you could meet the people you need to meet, take a tour, whatever that process might have been. And during the pandemic, no one traveled. That kind of evened the playing field, but I think it also increased the ease, facilitation for folks to look, sitting, kind of in their spaces at home, and not having to travel. Kind of the I think about the quintessential commercial where somebody's wearing their pajama bottoms and they've got their suit and tie and perfect hair coif during an interview, right? And you're able to do that. And
Yeah.
so I think there's been a little bit of that the industry has experienced, probably more than we had 2 years ago.
But let's put a positive spin on that, Rita, right? So last week, MassBio and MassBioEd ran a virtual career fair.
That's right.
And we had upwards of 400 attendees, 39 companies were hosted. We sent out a survey to the attendees. A lot of them weren't Massachusetts residents. So those are people who would have been looking to relocate to Massachusetts and would have had to come here for interviews, but they were able to put themselves in front of 10 or so companies from their living rooms in California and North Carolina and Ohio that they wouldn't have been able to do if we weren't in a virtual setting. And a lot of the feedback we got was, keep doing this virtually. Keep doing it. We're getting great people. We're getting great people from places we might not have gotten. So I think that if it's done right, and if we target let's use Massachusetts companies in the booths, and let's market it to people in other states as well.
Love it. Very fair point. And maybe one more question before we're asked to close out. This last question kind of goes back to the construction and new construction that we talked about at the beginning of the session. So I'm coming back full circle. The question is, are there any sort of regional targets ready to share what this new capacity looks like? And is there some maybe competition between states? So there's maybe a smaller cluster in Rhode Island or other places, Portland, Maine, where life science is starting to go. And I'll speak for myself. I took some time off for the Memorial holiday and I went back to my home state of Ohio, where I grew up, and saw some commercial, probably on TBS or one of the national channels. And at first I got really excited because the commercial was about life science and, the idea of moving into life science. And then it talked about Middlesex, and I got really excited because I thought it was Middlesex Community College.
No,
it was Middlesex, New Jersey.
it was.
So,
I saw that.
You saw the same commercial.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wow, what a marketing campaign. So any thoughts on that in terms of maybe where we have to fight for talent?
I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I'll just give you the short version, Rita, but I'm not in Massachusetts right now. I wasn't in Massachusetts 2 weeks ago. I'm working with places, Rhode Island, Florida, Texas, and people are building clusters. North Carolina is hot as can be right now around manufacturing. It is more and more competitive every single day. These emerging markets are putting their best foot forward, and they're fighting for these wins and for these jobs. And that's why it's so important that MassBio and MassBioEd continue with their mission, because when you're on top, you have to stay on top, and that isn't easy. So you have to work extra hard to stay there, and focusing on good relationships with academia, industry, and government, coupled with focusing on talent. You'll always win with the talent, because when you have the best talent, you can grow. When you have the best early stage scientific talent, you lead with innovation. And we've proven we can do that here better than anywhere else in the world in Massachusetts. Vaccines, quick, drugs for cystic fibrosis. Think of what this industry's done right here in Massachusetts. It's amazing.
Absolutely. Ben, any final comments on that?
Yeah, I think that we just have to make sure we keep our foot on the pedal, and we don't relent. We have a life sciences initiative that expires in a couple years, and we need to make sure that we're tailoring the third version of the life sciences initiative to what we need here in Massachusetts. Without our partners in government, we may not be number one 15 years from now. So let's make sure we don't get complacent, and that we keep doing what we need to do. We have the talent here. Let's just make sure everyone's focused on the life sciences and go from there.
I love it. Well said,
Great.
Ben.
Sounds great to me. Well,
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you, Bob and Ben. Couldn't have asked for two more dynamic speakers to close us out for the conference on today. So thank you very much for your energy and your insights. I know I learned a lot, and hopefully everyone on the webinar has learned a lot as well. So I'm ready to turn this over to our host at MassBioEd, Sunny Schwartz. Sunny, are you there? Sunny, you're muted.
Thanks. Sorry, I was in like green room waiting for you guys to finish. I had to be muted so nobody would hear me. So thank you so much, Bob and Ben and Rita. We have quite a challenge ahead of us to fill all those jobs you talked about. That we definitely have our work cut out for us. So that wraps up this year's conference. I want to just thank everyone for spending time with us today and just engaging in these really important conversations. I just want to thank everyone who participated in the breakout sessions this morning. We took careful notes on those, and your ideas are going to really kind of propel MassBioEd's work over the coming year. So thank you so much for that. And I just want to give a last shout out and thank you to our generous sponsors who made today's event possible. We really couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. And also to all of our partners, our speakers, our facilitators, to our partners at MassBio. And we look forward to continuing our work together in building and sustaining a life sciences workforce. So have a great rest of your day.